advisor walk into a bar.
Oh, and then what happens, Dave?
Well, the question comes up about property development for business owners.
Ooh,
what does it look
property
like?
development for business owners. So I reckon some of them, they're professional property developers, and I think they're okay. But certainly my experience is a lot of them end up falling backwards into property development, or either doing it by accident or doing it on purpose. And it doesn't always go as well as, it's not a ticket to free money. It doesn't always go as well as you hope.
The property always goes up in value, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think it probably does, but I think you spend a ton on developing it, and then you hit a gas pipe or there's a tree in the way or something, and then the council doesn't approve your plans. It's all very bad. So luckily, we have a property development extraordinaire with us today, Ian Bracken, who's actually, there's a bit of nepotism here because he's a partner at Taurus Legal Management, and he's my partner. We thought we'd have him on. He's new. We thought we'd have him on and he can explain a bit about property development. He's worked in Dubai doing literally billion-dollar deals. He's worked in Sydney. He's worked in Melbourne. He's an absolute top-tier expert in property development. So we're very pleased to have him as part of the team, and we're very pleased to have him on the podcast to talk about property development for business owners. Welcome, Ian. How are you today?
Yeah, not too bad. Thanks, Alex and Dave. How you going?
We're good. We're good. Did you like that intro? I really, made you sound good, didn't I?
You certainly did.
The other thing, Ian, I should mention is Ian's also worked in Castlemaine and lives in Castlemaine, so he's not all big end of town. He's also a salt of the earth kind of guy.
Yeah, so I've been across the spectrum, as you said, of big ticket work, international firms, but also smaller property developments. Even 2 or 3 units. A family who just want to, got a big block of land and want to split into 2 or 3 bits from that. That's still got its own issues and risks to much bigger greenfield property developments to, build construction developments. So, across the spectrum.
Can I ask you a question about that, I guess, about the smaller end stuff? Do you have, it seems to me that the property developers, there's a whole group of property developers from a whole spectrum, I guess. So there's one end which are professional property developers who might be doing big developments or small, but that's what they do. And then there's people sort of, I guess, in the middle who might do a couple themselves. Maybe they came into some money, maybe they inherited some money, whatever. And then there's probably someone who might just do it as a one-off. Do you find that people who are doing it one-off less professional? Do you find that there's more pitfalls in that? Is that a risky proposition, or does it always go well?
Oh no, you certainly need to know what you're doing, and experience plays a massive part. If you're going to a bank for finance, I'm not going to say it's impossible to get finance, but they will look at your experience. They want to know you know what you're doing, even for smaller developments. And it's one of those things you can really only learn a lot of it through experience. And of course, getting the right advisors on board, which any first-time property developer or any property developer should have, but once you're starting out, you just don't know what you don't know.
Yeah, but is that the biggest issue for a lot of people? Is that they just think it's because they've seen, peek down the roads, down this, and it didn't seem too bad. Is it people's lack of knowledge that always seems to get them into trouble, or is there something else that causes an issue?
Well, there's all sorts of risks, and I guess there is a perception with some people that it is money for jam potentially. That it can't be that hard. Everyone else is making millions off their property developments. Why can't I do it too? And usually it comes with you might come into a bit of money, but often you've got a lot of land. You're sitting on 2 acres or 3 acres, particularly say outside of Melbourne, or your business may have had land that the business operated on for years, and it's worth so much more now for you to actually develop it. So you've got the land, and let's get to work developing it, because it's easy money, but it's not that easy.
Can I talk about that? That's something a lot of our clients have found. They're not interested in property development particularly, but they've found they've bought some site. It might have been a site that when they bought it was kind of regional, and now it's part of Metro Melbourne. And so and they might be running a warehouse, a factory, a depot there. and that site is now worth probably more than their business. So if they sold their business and then leased the site out, they'd be much better off. Or if they sold the whole site, it could be turned into houses or whatever. And so they're really in a position where they're, and a lot of their wealth is now tied up in land. So they might not have a lot of cash, but they're actually very wealthy, or perhaps their children will be very wealthy. And so they're kind of, I know they're sort of stuck in this. Do I still want to operate my business? And my business comes with a whole lot of risks. Do I want to just get rid of the business and be a landlord, or do I want to sell the whole thing to a developer? Or perhaps do I want to develop it myself? And maybe they've got funds to do that. Maybe they can borrow to do that. They kind of found themselves in this strange position where property is where all of their wealth is, but that wasn't what they planned. Do you deal much with that? Do people come to you and say, what do I do?
Yeah, certainly. And there are different scenarios. There's that where the land, whether it was business or industrial or just sitting on the edge of Melbourne, and well, I could sell it, but then hey, if I develop it, I could make a lot more money. So people come from different backgrounds and discuss, the viability of the property development, and it really is important to get good advisors straight, from the get-go, so what the risks are. And when we talk about our experience, or is that the biggest problem, or lack of it, I mean, there's just risks that can hit anyone, the most experienced property developer as well. You need to analyse, the risks are involved, and I would usually set out a risk matrix that does look at construction risk, market risk, planning risk, finance risk. There's a number of things that are just out of your control, whether regardless of how experienced you are.
Well, a risk matrix sounds pretty good, sounds pretty fancy. Once you put it in the matrix, it's all very good.
But is there one more common scenario that you kind of see? I mean, I would think in today's environment, there's a couple of risks that stand out to me is, one is council approval and just the sheer delays in getting approval to do something. But also at the moment, I think finance risk would probably be right up there for a lot of people. They just don't have enough liquidity to hold the property to the point that it gets to, or current interest rates have creeped up, that's sort of taken people a bit by surprise. Is that common?
That's common, and of course your construction risk at the moment. So getting finance is something that over the last 10, 20 years that I've been working in finance is not an easy thing to do necessarily, and depending on the amount of money you need and how it's structured. So you might have enough to actually just get a straight loan, if you've got enough security. But if you're looking for a construction loan where the bank will actually fund the construction, if you're building buildings on your development, the bank are going to be out more than the value of the property. So then it becomes quite a distinct financing deal where you need to tick the boxes, and the bank really needs to have confidence in everything you're doing, and the building, your own management, your advisors. The bank will look at the project as if they are the developer, because they could be taking it over. So one of the first things I would say to clients is, where's the finance coming from? Do you need a construction loan? And if you do, you need to think as if the bank is going to be the developer, and understand what banks are looking for, and don't get too funky in how you want to do things, because the bank doesn't like things that aren't really vanilla or risk. I've seen it a number of times when people will try and give incentives or do interesting things in their contracts, and then they go to a bank, and the bank will say, well, we're not touching these pre-sale contracts, and pre-sales are going to be, one of the most important parts of the bankability of the project. So you really need to start thinking about bankability from day one, and start talking to financiers, or get a broker involved who will advise you as to what you need to do to satisfy the bank.
And should you look at a specialist broker, that brokers who specialise in construction loans if you need one, or can any broker do it?
Oh, you'd be looking at a specialist, construction finance broker, or business broker,
And if you got more security, more money, then you can just get a straight loan. You might probably in a better position to control the process, and perhaps you can do some more funky stuff, can you? Than if you need a construction loan, you've got to make sure it stays vanilla.
Yeah, I mean, you could, but the bank are also going to want to know how you're paying that money back. So,
Right.
if you are getting a straight loan,
Yeah.
obviously that's one of the key objectives. All right, how are we getting this money back?
Yeah.
And just depending on your income flow and your assets and serviceability, what is the out for this loan?
Yeah.
So today I just want to recap on the topic for today. We've got Ian Bracken as a partner of Taurus Legal Management, just taking us through some of the challenges that we've got with property development for business owners. So that is the topic.
A couple of examples I would give is someone came to me and they'd already start selling their pre-sales. As incentive, they were offering 5% deposits. Now, a bank will not want 5% deposits in the pre-sales.
Right.
What would the bank want then?
They want 10% deposits on the pre-sales. The pre-sales are a very significant part of the financing because that's how the bank gets repaid. Other things to think of are how long the sunset dates in the contracts are going to be.
So when you talk about sunset dates, Ian, what does that mean for people?
Yeah, so if you enter into an off-the-plan contract, there will be a date where it ends if the development hasn't completed. So usually, let's say you're expecting settlement in a year. You might have a settlement date of 1 year time from signing the contract, but there's another year or another 2 that just to allow time, if things don't go to plan. Now, the sunset dates change. The laws around that changed in 2019, where it's a bit difficult now for vendors to actually get out of an off-the-plan contract purely by saying the 3 years is up, the sunset date is up, we're terminating the contract. Because some developers, they would just delay things as the market went up and then get out of contract, sign a new. So there is protection there for purchasers to not have a vendor do that. They do need consent of the purchaser to terminate under a sunset date. Or otherwise get consent of the court, the Supreme Court, if the purchaser doesn't agree, and they, essentially need good reason to be able to get out of that contract.
So these people who are selling, say, with the 5%, they come to you and they've got the pre-sales already, and they say, "Well, isn't this great?" And you say, "Well, it's not that great." They're just getting their conveyancer to do the contract, are they? And they're not getting any advice more broadly. Would that be right? Like, if someone's doing the contract for them, someone who doesn't know what they're doing.
Yeah, I mean, it has happened where whoever has done that hasn't considered the bigger picture or been advised to consider the bigger picture, as instructed to, in terms of, what a bank's going to think, the bankability of it, and the financing. So that's, another point would be the sunset date. Banks want that to be at least 1 year more than the date of practical completion under a building contract. So you've got to tie that in as well to give the security, or if there's delays in the project in the building, that purchasers can't get out themselves. Before it's completed. So,
but again, if you didn't have the right advice about that, you might just go ahead and do it and not know that it's going to be a problem for the bank until it's too late.
Exactly, and that's what I see quite commonly, that understanding these things around the bankability of the project haven't been appreciated. And there's other things. There's, you want a lawyer to look at the plan of subdivision. I've had issues where the plan has had consequences down the track that weren't considered. For example, so I had one development where, so the developer, it was their home, and they had about 3 acres that they were developing that they wanted to turn into 30 units. And with the owners corporation and getting services up to their home as part of the planning permit, they became, the house was actually part of the owners corporation, which would be fine. And they were told, "Is that okay?" Yeah, that's okay by, initially through planning advice, you can do this. But the issue was what people thought was that, if you know owners corporations, there's two different types. There's the unlimited owners corporation and then a limited one. So the unlimited one is like the primary big one that every lot has to be a part of, and it has power over lots. And it really essentially is the main owners corporation. A limited one is where, say you've got an apartment building, there's a gym on the third floor, only third floor residents can use the gym. So you set up a smaller limited owners corporation, they pay for it, they get to use it. So it's quarantined off. So in this particular development, I guess they thought it was going to be like a limited one. It's still part of one property to bring up some services. Yeah. All of a sudden, you've got this big structural problem because their home is caught up in this development.
Yeah, right.
And is that the lack of advice? I mean, is that just being poorly advised by someone?
Well, not being advised.
Not being advised. That old chestnut. The old not being advised. It's very cheap to not get advice.
Yeah.
Use a plus.
Until it goes wrong.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I didn't appreciate any of it. It's very interesting hearing the practical stories of what can go wrong. Because you sort of think property development, well, old mate inherits, his grandma's house. And he thinks, I'm going to subdivide that bad boy. It's big, it's on the corner block. It's going to be great. You think you're going to subdivide, keep one and sell the other. That's what I hear all the time. I'm going to keep one and sell the other. It's going to be great. I'm going to live in them both or something and save my capital gains tax or whatever I'm doing. I don't know. I think about all these geniuses tell me how clever they are. And I think, I'm not sure you've really thought this through. Structuring wise, I'm not really sure you've thought about, and then they find that there's a tree in the backyard they can't cut down and it's all very bad. So, obviously there's money to be made and property, I think, is one of the key ways we've all that Australians have made, their money and in the world that people have created wealth over time. So that's all great, and you sort of want to be a part of that. But there's a lot of kind of technical stuff to work through that can go wrong.
There is a lot, yeah. So one advisor might be saying, so in that case, the surveyor says we can do this, this will work, but the lawyer hasn't come along to have a good look at it as well, just to see the issues that it will create in terms of financing. And, it was just a bit of a mess. So, I mean, from the outset, you're really looking at a number of things. I guess one of the key things as well is the structuring, the entity and the tax. So that needs a really good look at what entity you're going to use. And
so there's some tips on that.
You
super every time, or don't stick it in super, or is there something you can tell us about that, or is it just it depends on the situation?
I guess it depends on the situation, but I mean, in terms of putting in super, wherever your equity is coming from, it's coming from. I wouldn't be advising on where to put what money to put into it.
That's my job.
But you're going to have a certain amount of equity into the vehicle, and looking at what sort of entity is actually going to do this development.
But Ian, is it
the company, or
is one of the issues for a lot of people is that they don't kind of do their cash flows? So great, I've purchased the property. All good, or it's inherited, or they've purchased. Then they said, let's develop it, which then says, well, I need advice, but my hold costs are going to be X amount, and they may not take into account, quantity surveyors, engineers, architecture work. All of a sudden, they thought, I'll just flip it. But it's like, no, but it's going to cost you $500,000 just to get the point to a stage where council will either approve or disapprove. Now, if they disapprove, then you might need to hold it for an extended period of time. Is that because that becomes a real issue that I hear for a lot of people? They just go, "Oh God, the costs are blown out."
Yeah,
but they've never put those numbers down and put the kind of best case, worst case scenario to themselves. But also, I would imagine different councils would in certain states of the country would have different rules around the way they do certain things.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you need to appreciate that there are all sorts of costs involved in property development, and many first-timers probably haven't even thought of. And then the potential for cost overruns. Getting through planning stage, depending on the size of development, can cost hundreds of thousands of dollars.
And take years.
And take years. It's not uncommon to see $300,000, $500,000 allocated to planning costs. So, I mean, there's specialists out there who can do all this for you and crunch the numbers and advise you. It's just a matter of whether, how much money do you want to spend on them, and you should really, if it's going to be a sizable development, to get that advice in place, but factor in the extra costs that these advisors will cost. And I think for any first-time property developer, even if it is relatively small, you should seek that advice in terms of just more from a planning perspective, more from a project manager perspective who can advise you as to all the costs.
But even all the environmental changes, if you look at some of the new rules that come through around endangered species of plants or animals, or if there's waterways, or, there can be these constant changing of government rules in certain pockets that just seem to take, especially if you've taken a few years to develop the site, rules can change in that time period. That's where I see a lot of it sort of not coming unstuck, but just people's misunderstanding literally of how long it can take. And also from a council point of view, they're like, oh, well, you're on the list. We'll get to you. I'm like, well, yeah, but I need to commercialise this. Yeah, but you're still part of there, and we're busy. And like it seems that sometimes the councils are just not in a hurry to get stuff done.
Yeah. We've got a property developer client at the moment who's, they bought a lot. And next door, there's all these houses, and this lot, they say, the council says, no, that's a floodplain. And they go, well, hang on, but next door's a floodplain too. And they say, oh, yeah, it is. When we allowed that, the rules were different back then. And so we allowed that. So just what's happening in the neighbourhood is not necessarily, you would think.
Correct.
I've always thought, oh, well, if that's allowed there, then, if that's approved, then next door will be approved. If there's a 3-story house here, you'll be allowed a 3-story house next door. It's not the case. Again, not that simple, So they've ended up with this expense, this lot that they bought. They probably had to sell it again for roughly the same price, but that wasn't the plan. The plan was to subdivide it and build, 20 units on it or 20 blocks on it. Now they can't build it all. I think they can, but their houses have to be a lot bigger, so a lot fewer blocks, which means, that the whole thing is pretty uncommercial.
I think that's a good point. You might get your permit, but you're aware of what conditions might come on that permit. It's actually issued. We're
all kind of supported by the conditions. I was just at a meeting this morning with a bunch of business owners, and they were all winching about. And again, none of them are property developers. They've all got, bits of land that they own through their business, and they're all doing quite well, and the land's worth good money, but they've all got these ridiculous conditions, or they say they're ridiculous conditions. They all got approved, but the conditions they can't really comply with. So what's the point of being approved? So, and then the whole thing's more costly. It's also a massive headache, and they've got businesses to run, and they're not, they're not professional property developers. But that said, they've got a lot of wealth in these properties, so you obviously want to realise that wealth or make the most of it, while you can.
Yeah.
But that comes back to the your attention to detail.
Yeah.
Because you look at so much stuff. I mean, the responses that can come back from, various Indigenous reports, environmental reports. I mean, they all have to, there's almost an audit trail that follows it through to make sure if you're doing this, then this has to comply. But it might be from, a different department. And that's where I also see people become unstuck, is that no one is overseeing, which I think goes back to your original point, Ian, around having an experienced project manager who knows that, the left and the right hand need to communicate to each other. But a lot of time people go, no, we'll be right. It's like, no, well, then you need approval from this, and this department before we can give you the final approval. But people go, well, what do you mean? Which part have I missed? And sometimes it's that really important piece of the glue to hold it all together. They're like, yeah, sorry. So you spend all this time and money in all these other areas, but you haven't got there.
Yeah. I mean, in development, say even 40, 50 lots, I've had clients who spent 5 years as their full-time job doing this property development.
Yeah.
Even with a project manager, it's very time-consuming.
And are they all fabulously wealthy now?
Not after paying their legal bills.
That's why we're hiding.
Well, then that's the other risk at the end. The market risk. You've got to sell these. If you can get pre-sales locked in pretty early. That's great. But when can you start selling your pre-sales? You need to tick off your planning before you're doing that.
Yeah, and then you got to sell. It's really, you got to have sold most of them before a dollar's coming back to you, right? Because you've got a lot of bills to pay, and it's the last 10 units or whatever, the last 10 blocks that are where you're making your money. And until that comes around, it's all just a plan. Like until you got cash in your pocket.
Yeah, that's right. You'll get it at the end. Often they're stage developments, so the property prices will go up over the years, and that's, I guess, what is being banked on, but not guaranteed either. And you sit there, at the end, you should get, hopefully, quite a few of your last sales in your own pocket. But
and then,
so are there any?
Go ahead.
Are there any examples where you can give without, being specific on names, because we're talking about property development for business owners? Is there an example you can say, here is a really successful one? Like, I saw these guys, they did this, they followed this, and it was a really successful development. And the other side is there one where you look and you go, that was just an absolute complete disaster?
In terms of the complete disasters, I certainly have seen it during the process through risks that weren't anticipated, like your builder going broke and that sort of thing.
Yeah, well,
that would help.
It never happens. Builders don't go broke.
No.
Just
and just cost blowouts. So, I wouldn't say, there's disasters. I've seen, builders developers just lose the lot because of certain risks that eventuated. I've seen plenty of developers who've made a lot of money. To go smoothly.
And what did they do different?
Well, again, this is where it comes into risks that what can you mitigate? So you do a risk matrix, but there's also mitigation of this. What can't you mitigate? And it's just a pure risk. Like you can do all the due diligence on the builder you want, but is there any guarantee they won't go bust?
And you can't change them. You can do due diligence on the suburb or whatever, but you can't. If the market goes up, look, the whole economy, who would have thought of COVID and all that stuff? And even when COVID came along, who would have thought how that impacted property? Nobody predicted. We thought it would crash and it boomed and then it crashed. And nobody, even the best economists in the world, can't predict it, right?
So, what did they do differently besides, I guess, an intangible of they were more experienced? I think they, after having done several prior, they were able to know the process, have been through it, and to be able to mitigate those risks a little bit better, the ones they could.
Do some try and take on too big a job first off rather than, little one, so you're managing your downside risk, and then that works, you move on to the next one? Because that always seems to be the issue. Some people, how easy is it? Got all this dough, I'll just throw myself into it.
I usually will see people starting off with smaller ones who are now on to bigger ones. They haven't done it that way. If someone just put up their hand and said, well, I'm going to create this 100-lot development, I would. How are they going to get the finance? How are they actually going to get it off the ground? Might have all this dough, but I usually wouldn't see that, because I usually see them relying on banks having funding their experience and trusting that they get the job done. I mean, that's a critical point for the banks. They really do look at the developer and the person behind it.
Yeah, and it must be much harder now to get a loan than it was a little while ago, right?
Yeah, so levels of pre-sales have increased over time. If there is other land, just what LVRs that banks will lend on are coming down. So and you've got to look at as part of the planning risk, but your zoning as well, and what banks will lend on certain zones. So I guess that's the key thing. If you can start talking to bankers, that might be the first place to start, really.
Yeah, right. I mean, it makes sense that the banks sort of know what they're doing. They're going to protect their money, and so if you follow the rules that the bank put for you, obviously they'll fund it. But also, they're probably not. It's not a bad thing to do anyway because it's going to help you run a successful project. I mean, in the face of all that, should business owners who are sitting on a big bit of land and thinking, "Do I want to move my depot and maybe develop this land?" They might just go, "You know what? I might move my depot and lease the land to someone else, or just sell the land to someone, and they can worry about all that headache." I guess that's the you might earn the rewards, but that's because you're taking all the risk.
Yeah, well, that's the key question. Do I just sell the land or develop myself? If you're going to develop it yourself, be aware of what you're jumping into.
Yeah, but also out of that, you can have the situation where you may have so many acres of dirt, but the planning permit hasn't come through. Now, that may be holding, a depot, or it may be just pure dirt and there's nothing on it. But there's also the time factor of getting council approval that, as we said, can be taking years. So you might sell it at, $5 million without planning permit, but you take the 3 to 5 years to get the planning permit and then put it on the market. It might be worth 25 mil.
Yeah.
So it also comes back to, yes, you may not want to be the developer, but a piece of dirt without a planning permit is nowhere near as valuable as a piece of dirt with a planning permit on, because a person can purchase and get started on it straight away.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's something to look at, whether you just go through to getting the permit. And I've got a couple of clients at the moment, certainly, who are going through the planning process and not quite sure what they're going to do, whether they, just sell.
Because it gives you options then, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. I've heard developers say that it's about a third, a third in the land, a third in the planning permit process, and then a third in the, finishing the development. And so, you get, if you do it all, then you get 3 times as much, but obviously you take 3 times as much risk, sort of in rough terms. Would you agree with that, Ian, or it sort of just varies?
Oh, I think it varies. Yeah. About thirds there. Yeah.
Yeah.
But how are the rules, if you've worked internationally and domestically, how different is it from overseas to here?
No, in Dubai, you don't pay any tax, do you? That's got to be a plus.
I guess overseas I was doing a lot more project finance work for large infrastructure developments.
A big port or a big container processing plant or something.
Yeah, container terminals, power plants, roads, that sort of thing, USL plants. I did, a number of construction projects over there, but that is a little bit different, particularly when the developer's usually the sheik and all that.
So the sheik doesn't have to worry about a construction loan, is that what you're saying?
No, not so much.
Yeah. I saw something. There was the word $1 billion is one of the projects was worth $1 billion, and I don't even know how much money that is. I think that's a lot of that's more money than I've ever had to write down. But is that right? $1 billion, one of the projects?
Yeah. That was a construction project in Dubai. I think that experience really got me aware of the whole risk matrix. That's the first thing you look at, all the different risks involved. And if you're looking at a project finance, you're looking at the offtake risk, supplier risk. There's all sorts of, the matrix could be 50 pages long, so it won't be as bad for a Victorian construction development, but it does get you thinking about all the different all the different risks you've got to think about. I mean, over in Dubai, we had political risks, so that was quite fascinating.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, okay. Yeah, I don't think about that. It's something we don't have to worry about too much, although I guess we do to some extent. The how taxes might change or whatever. What about, Dave, should we be getting financial advice if we're deciding to do some property development? Should that should work into our financial plan in life, right? It's going to tie up a bunch of money for a period, and that might work because that's your plan to build some wealth. But it might be that you actually need cash right now to pay for the school fees or whatever.
Well, but this is where it comes back to that whole discussion around what's the purpose of the asset, and what do you want to do with it? So if the current site, that you might be renting a particular site and you think, no, I want to move my business and purchase that site. Okay, so that can be a good or bad thing. Do you purchase it in a trust? Do you purchase it in a company? Do you purchase it in your self-managed super fund?
Yeah.
Now, again, what's the purpose of it? Because once you've purchased it, for instance, in your self-managed super fund, you can't use borrowed funds to redevelop the site.
Yeah.
Whereas if your intent is to then purchase a site to redevelop it in multiple years, then you'd probably want to keep it away from your super fund. So It comes back to what is the intention that you're going to be looking at. But as you said, what are your cash requirements? And if you're doing it in parallel to your operating business, that can work well, but it can also drain the business of cash. So if all of a sudden the business needs cash to continue to operate, but all of a sudden you've got this amazing property development deal going on, but it is sucking the life out of the business, then you're kind of caught because the golden goose is being drained to continue to produce cash to support something that's still a little bit of we hope to get this deal away. So
you might not make money for years.
Correct. And so it's this combination that people have got to understand, which I think goes back to Ian's initial point, is sitting down and working through what are the risks, and being really clear around what some of those risks could be, and sitting with someone who can take you through those various steps. Because I do think a lot of people, they just sort of think that there's only a certain amount of risks. But as you said, there's political risk, there's finance risk, there's market risk, there's environmental risk. There's a whole range of different risks that can be multiple of pages, but you then work your way through and go, can we control that? Yes or no? And what are the steps that we can do? I mean, I get, some people say, oh, you're being dark cloud about the whole thing. But assessing the risk before you go into a project, I'd rather then pull back on something if you think the risk is too great and let someone else take the risk on. So as a form of wealth management and wealth development, I have no issue with utilising your operating business to support a property development process, but don't put yourself under any illusion that if you've got a phenomenal operating business that spits out cash, that you will be able to transpose all of those skills straight across to your property development business or little, sidekick, thinking, because they can be two completely different environments. And that's where we get a bit of mixture for people. They really struggle in that space to understand, oh, but I was really successful over here. Well, that doesn't mean that you're going to be really successful, because sometimes you just don't know through experience.
Yeah, and it's an attitude thing too. There's that famous saying, if you chase two rabbits, you'll catch neither.
Yeah.
I sort of believe in that generally, in that, if you're trying to run a property development over here and you're trying to run your normal business, and maybe your normal business in manufacturing, computers, that's a lot different to, doing a property development and trying to do both. And you were saying, Ian, some people running these bigger developments, that's their full-time job for 5 years. I mean, it's just not feasible to try and do both. And you've got to, are you a lawyer or are you a property developer? What are you really trying to do? And I think stay focused like a laser beam on what you do and make that a success, and then use that cash to go and to invest and to live your life.
Or bring in the advisors, bring in the team around you, or keep it a small development, learn and then progress up.
Yeah.
I mean, you've still got to be involved, so you can't just outsource everything to advisors. They're advising you. You really, you can have this great project manager, great architect, great builder, great everyone, but you're at the centre of it, and it is time consuming.
Yeah. Well, the other thing that we can sometimes see is that, again, really good operating business spits out lots of cash and it's functioning really well, and all of a sudden the owners start to lean on some of their staff who are very good at certain, like they might lean on their project manager who's functioning the business. Oh, can you just look at this and can you track that for me as well? It's like, hang on, but that's not their job.
Yeah.
But they put the squeeze on them. Private business, they can do those sorts of things.
Yeah.
But again, keep people focused on what they're good at and bring in other people for other things. But again, I agree with your point, Ian. It's about the ownership component. You can't just, outsource it all and just expect it to get the result that you're looking for.
Yeah.
One point I'd make too from the outset, is to consider who actually owns this land
Mm.
to start with, and what structure do you want to use to develop it. So you may, unless you want a very hefty stamp duty bill, you might be left with perhaps not the ideal entity developing this property.
Yep. Yeah, and that comes into that strategy again. And is it a buy, develop, and flip, or is it a buy, develop, and hold? So that also may determine how you want to hold the asset when you originally purchase. What is the intent for it? Because if it's a long-term, family intergenerational transfer strategy, holding it in a family trust or a unit trust may be far more beneficial than holding it in a company. But again, it comes back to, well, what are the tax implications, and am I purchasing it to develop, or am I purchasing it as a land bank? Like, there's a whole range of different strategies rather than just turn out and go, oh, look good, I just thought I'd buy it. I mean, again, it comes back to what's the purpose of doing it, and what is your ultimate long-term intent?
Yeah, for you, for your business, and for your family and your lifestyle.
Correct.
We've got a good client, a long-term client who started off in building, and they were building. All they could do was build. They had no money, so they were building, and they made decent money building. And then eventually they bought some property, built on it, and then flipped it. Bought another property, built on it, flipped it. Then did well out of that, made some money, and then were able to build and hold. And then they leased out and leasing out factories out in towards Dandenong area, and that area has really boomed over the past 20 years. And now they've got all these factories that they own that they're and they've largely paid off, and they're doing very well. But it was part of this kind of gradual process, and they're now heading towards retirement, and they've got good so then. But it's a real stage thing. You don't just suddenly become a property developer. And they didn't, when they were builders, didn't just say, okay, let's buy this do this 10 unit development. They said, no, let's just build enough until we can afford to flip one. And then they had to sell it because they had no money. But then eventually they could hold them. And you might hold one and sell the other, and then eventually hold them all. They held a lot of them and ended up, very wealthy. But again, no cash. Probably their whole lives they've had no cash. And their children will probably do very well out of it. So you've got to think about, well, what am I trying to do? And I think they should, sell some and go on a holiday and, enjoy their life while they can, while they're still healthy. Because, one minute you fall over or you have a health issue and suddenly you can't go overseas anymore, and you've worked your whole life and you haven't really enjoyed it. It's part of broader life strategy. But I think property development can and should form a part of that for a lot of people, but not for everyone, and not for everyone all the time. It depends where you are in your life.
Correct. And I just think any of those challenges operating any business, you got to enjoy it. There's no point in doing it because it seems to be easy to make the money. You do it because there's an enjoyment of buying the next deal and moving it on. And as you said, some you'll buy and hold, others you'll buy and flip. Others you'll buy, you'll split them in half, hold one and flip one, and then kind of go around again. And look, also a really good way to deal with intergenerational transfer of wealth to family members is that, you can purchase them for family members, and you might start them in a residential property and then move them into something else. And that might be then a commercial piece of real estate that then, do you know what I mean? There's all sorts of strategies that you can deal with in the way that you cascade assets out for multiple generations. People are going to be, and you use that as an example in certain family groups, they will hold substantial tracts of land, and they can be held for literally generations. And there's no real reason for them to be offloading. It just doesn't allow that to occur. So it's interesting. So is there any sort of final points that either of you would like to make?
I'd just say you got to look at your whole life and go, is this what do I want to spend the next 5 years doing this? Is my, husband or wife on board for this? There's some real personal issues you want to I'd just say, don't take it lightly, that's all. I think property development's great. And I think, property is a real key to wealth. But it's something that's just got to factor into your overall plan and do it with your eyes open.
A bit like the old, eyes wide open. You got to be aware of what, understand your downside as well as the upside risks along the way. We're going to close out today. So I would like to thank Alex and Ian from Taurus Legal Management. They can both be contacted via LinkedIn and via the tauruslawyers.com.au website.
Thank you. And I would like to thank Dave Murdoch, the wealth activist, for hosting. You can be contacted at LinkedIn at David Murdoch, or via the website, which is paxtonbridge.com. He's a .com, I'm a .au, because go Aussie.
I've got a whole lot of other ones too. All right, gentlemen, thank you once again. A pleasure, and we look forward to catching up again soon.
Chat next time.
Farewell, everyone. Cheers.
Thanks.